Dog's barking. All right, dog's getting away. The dog's happen.
The dog's barking. Hello.
5 weeks in a row with Doctors and Doctors Hawse. It's actually pretty cool because y'all were out getting provisions and hunkering down for whatever, and life got in the way, and we didn't get to have any green room talk. So this will be the purest form and version. And by the way, wait, I don't even have my cool microphone plugged in. I've got it showing but not plugged in. Can I plug it in?
I don't know, can you?
Oh, shit. Shucks. Hold on. Okay. Now I have it plugged in, but can you hear me?
Yes.
We could hear you before.
I know you could. It's like telemedicine.
Exactly.
So we got a couple of things to cover today. We got states that are returning to quote unquote normal. We have a White House that is talking about returning to work more than they are talking about the medical. It's interesting to know this isn't a political show, but of course you can't escape political because the president has been doing less briefings and more medical folks have been talking. But I also want to get into the discussion about there might be a new thing that we found. So let's take it any direction you want. It's 18 minutes before your governor gets on and talks.
The governor took a day off today.
He took his first day off.
See, that's returning to normal. In fact, in honor of Amy's favorite place to go and spend a month like May, can you see that? That says Cinnamon Shore. So we have been pretending like many Texans that we go to the beach and we go to get the cool Gulf Stream breeze flowing over us. Today was our day, which I'm giving a shout out to both daughters, all three daughters, both schools for all three daughters. There you go. Where do you want to take it?
So are you talking about the new antiviral that remdesivir?
Is this Gilead?
Yes.
Somebody Gilead?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
If you go back in the archives, we talked about it 2 or 3 weeks ago.
That's what I love.
I do think.
Yes, and our 20-year-old son immediately bought Gilead stock.
Unfortunately, well, that's a separate conversation. I think the issue with it is it is very easy to have anecdotal information which pushes people in one direction or another. And, I think this in a situation where people are panicky, you tend to grab on to the positive and you tend to ignore the negative. There is, in medicine, there's a concept called confirmational bias, which is, people tend to, like, if you go and you have some intervention, right, that you feel like it worked, all right, you tend to be a big advocate for that. Whereas if you go and that intervention didn't work, you don't spend a lot of time telling people how it didn't work. You've gone on to something else.
Yeah, confirmation bias. I think for all listeners, they can appreciate, as my hometown would, that the University of Kentucky Wildcat basketball team is the greatest basketball team ever in the history. Texas Longhorn fans rightly also believe that Texas Longhorn football is the greatest football team ever. That's confirmation bias.
Everyone knows that it's Kentucky.
Oh, well, as long as we know that the data sometimes runs contrary and we tend to dismiss things that we don't like, which is why we also do confirmation bias with our ingestion of news feeds, and people will stick to one channel or another. But I digress, but continue.
So, I think the issue is this may pan out to be something that is really helpful. My guess is that it will be one of many things that in combination with one another may turn out to be helpful. And this is the purpose of social distancing to a large point, in that the more you can personally delay getting this, the more people are learning, the more the medical establishment is learning, and the higher likelihood that you're going to have a positive outcome from this, just because the learning curve on it's been so steep.
This is remember we talked about it because we talked about the WHO, like the World Health Organization funding I guess
Now, by the way,
So-
you don't call it. You obviously call it the WHO and not the
Yeah.
WHO.
It's kind of like the web.
You call it
The web.
I call it the HEB.
no
I call it the WHO instead of the
Yes.
WHO. It may be a Kentucky thing.
GB. Yes,
It
fabulous.
may be a pediatrician thing because when we use growth charts, we use CDC growth charts and WHO growth charts. And sometimes we use CDC WHO combined growth charts and we manipulate the statistics.
But only one question: who is on first?
Yeah, exactly. But I remember we talked about this because remember the big trial of remdesivir. There's an international trial, not just the one here, but that's called Solidarity. That is the WHO is in charge of that.
And
So
that he was talking about over 1,000 different cases or participants.
yeah, I mean that would be what you would expect from any decent trial. I mean, an N, we call that an N, right? The number in a trial would be in the thousands. A really, really good trials, several thousand.
Okay. So anyway, I interrupted you with some pretty corny jokes going back to 100 years ago. The point being, what does that mean for all of this? And David, you mentioned it just reinforces social distancing. It gives us more time. Right. So what does it mean for everyday Americans when they look about return to work and return to a new normal?
Well, it's a medicine, even if the medicine does work, and I feel like a negative Nelly, but David and I were talking about this, it's an IV medication. It's not something like Tamiflu right now in its current form, not that it couldn't be, but we don't know what the oral absorption is. There's lots of those hurdles, right? Right now, people only get that if they're really sick.
So in other words, you can't get it over the counter. You have to be in a hospital. You have to be in
ICU right now.
You already have to be in a bad way to begin with. So
Correct. Right. So it may be there. Again, it needs more study. Does it help if you take it like Tamiflu, like the first 48 hours when you start to feel bad? And those things haven't been done. So it's good news, but it's not like, oh, we've cured it. Now let's just go do whatever we were doing. That's not.
I think the issue that we get into right now is that we've been doing this for close to 2 months at this point. And, everyone wants this to end, and the days are getting sunnier and warmer and prettier, and people want to get out.
Pushback. There are some people who enjoy their video games so much that they are not pushing back.
Yes, it's true.
But continue.
Everyone wants this to be over, and sometimes, when you get panicky to get something over, you make rash and irrational decisions. And,
right.
I think the big thing is, my father, who's 78 and has some health problems, was asking me the other day, when can he get out? And, the thing, and, I had to explain to him that, Dad, if you get this, you're not going to tolerate it very well. And although they are going to, obviously the grocery stores are open, but a 78-year-old with some chronic health problems probably shouldn't be tooling around in the grocery store.
So I've heard it discussed among, different people, influencers and whatnot. Do we need to consider, as part of the reopening of business and life as we know, age dependent, health dependent, demographic dependent, or can we, from a government standpoint, only do it based on geography? What are your thoughts there?
I think that's complicated. I think when you get into the government has a hard time saying if you're over a certain age, you shouldn't go out. I mean, they can make recommendations, and I think they are making recommendations that if you have chronic health problems, that you shouldn't be the one that's going to the grocery store and that sort of thing. I think that there are some exciting things out there that are going to help, but there was an article in the New York Times today talking about the natural course of illnesses that are novel. Okay, so that we haven't seen before. And a few weeks ago, we talked about smallpox and American Indians. And I think what's interesting when I see all of this, it does look like children definitely get this illness. Okay, but they tend not to get as sick as adults do. And it's kind of like chickenpox. If you get chickenpox when you're a kid, you tend not to do as bad as when you get it when you're 50 or 60 or immunosuppressed and that sort of thing. So I went back and I was looking at the data as far as novel viruses on naive populations. So what that means is a new virus to a population that's never seen it. Never seen it. And so if you take tuberculosis, which is not a virus, but you take tuberculosis, you take measles, you take flu, and you take smallpox, and you introduce that into North America and Central America, that turned to 90% of indigenous people in North America died from those 3 viral illnesses.
And 1 bacterial. Yeah.
And so, the issue with all of this is this rush to get out there and fix this is, I'm not saying that 90% is the number, okay? But even 5%, even 10% is just shocking numbers.
Yeah.
That, millions of Americans would pass away in that circumstance.
Well, and we've all been really lucky. We were most of us born in a really lucky time. Like even my baby boomer parents had polio vaccine. We're not used to massive amounts of people dying from an infectious disease. I mean, we're vaccinated against all that, and we take it very for granted, that we just walk around and we get some minor colds and we get the flu, and that's our really bad. So I think most of us don't have any point of reference to realize just how bad this can be. And I'm not saying I do, I'm just saying when I read things that are written by the adult medicine people, like in New York, taking care of this.
By the way, you both are adult medicine people. I just want to point that out.
Right.
Yeah, but I do not like to take care of adults, and I'm so happy it doesn't look like
that kind of adult medicine people. Okay, never mind. I digress. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, I think babies smell better than adults. I think babies smell better than sick adults. How's that?
For sure.
Okay. All right. Keep going.
But yeah, when you read the accounts of that, I'm like, yeah, this is nothing we've ever seen. It's nothing that like my generation of medical professionals has ever seen, or the generation before us. And so there's not really even any more experienced medical professional that we can go to and say, hey, what was it like when, you didn't have.
Yeah. Can I provide a really interesting analogy, which is in 2001, when Twin Towers fell, and it was like, holy crap, we are actually going to go to war. Prior to that, the only experience of people currently in the military was let me make sure I get this number right so people remember, 111 hours of sustained ground combat in Desert Storm in the early 90s. 111 hours.
Yeah.
Some vehicles didn't even have to refuel that conflict was so short. And then prior to that, we did have Panama and we did have Grenada, but we certainly had among, experienced senior professionals, Vietnam, and they had some experiences to draw on. So maybe there was an entire generational shift. But what I'm hearing you say is in the medical community, there's literally nobody alive.
Yeah, we got nothing.
Yeah.
There's no one alive that has dealt with that.
HIV would be the one thing.
HIV would be the one thing
that, was a novel viral thing that came out and radically changed.
Yep.
And it made radical changes when was the last time your dentist was in your mouth without gloves? Well, it was before HIV.
Yeah.
Okay. When was the last time?
Okay, but to be fair, as Molly, I think Molly Wood said on Marketplace, Make Me Smart, HIV had a profound effect on how we think about sex in the United States, or dentistry, or promiscuous sex, or unprotected sex. But we're talking about unprotected sitting next to a person in a basketball arena.
Yeah, I was going to say, respiratory is just a whole other thing of how many people you can infect. Like if it's bloodborne, one infected person typically infects one other, but and that's what you hear people talk about the R naught, or getting the R naught down to 1, where one person,
which we explained in your first or second episode of Talks Medical.
And just to put it in perspective, this always fascinates me. Measles is R16. One person infects 16 other people.
Wow.
So when your pediatricians go crazy about getting the kids their MMR, that's why.
Yeah.
Because
the other interesting thing, and this is in the popular press, and that's the only place I've read it, but the other interesting thing that I've seen in the last few days is about, and this, everyone's going to think this is gross. If anyone's listening,
I'm David Hawse. Nothing.
But you shed this virus in stool. And so one of the things that they've done, and they've gone into communities, there was some of this in the Netherlands, where before there were any cases, they were getting samples out of the sewage system in these cities. And then they started seeing it, they started seeing this develop, or they started being able to identify the proteins in the sewage system before there were diagnosed cases. And so from a tracking standpoint, that could be a radical thing in that you could start looking, if they could start quantitating it and figuring out how much was in the sewage system of a city, you might be able to predict and say, this is starting to increase, we need to go in lockdown. Or even as small as neighborhoods or sections of a city, you could possibly do that.
Can I just give a shout out to Stephen Johnson, who wrote the book, How We Got to Now. Beth, I think you even might have referred to this in a previous episode. His book, How We Got to Now, begins with the history of modern world, but it's a book about the history of modern world, but it begins with the study of clean. And it does the study of London with the curious professor scientist in the 1800s who was trying to understand cholera, and it was through clean water and
you'll have to tell your Daryl Jennings story.
So the first real class in medical school that you start learning about disease is pathology class that you take during your second year, and we had lectures, but then we had small groups, and my small group professor was a gentleman named Daryl Jennings, who's currently the chair of pathology at UK.
He's just an awesome teacher.
He's a fabulous guy, great teacher.
Daryl Jennings? I'm
Daryl Jennings. And so Daryl Jennings, at the very first small group that we had with him, he sat down and said, now, before anyone gets a big head about being a doctor, I want to remind you all that plumbers have saved more lives than doctors ever will. And that is a fact.
And in many communities, plumbers make more money than doctors.
That is true as well.
Yeah, that's true.
But clean water in and dirty water out of a community is a huge thing. And so I do think that we're learning some things as being able to target and track this illness in a way that, because what I'm talking about is, like, right now we're struggling testing lots of people in a community. Whereas if you can go down and get one little vial of fluid out of the sewage system, and then you can go and you're testing a whole community, and then you can target testing in that community. You can target testing in that community in order to more efficient with what we're doing.
We've talked about contact tracing. It's going to be one of the most important elements of this. A lot of communities don't have the money for it. A lot of technology firms are trying to figure out. Google and Apple, for the first time in their company's competitive history, are talking about working together on a system. But you are, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but what I'm hearing is we might be able to just send people down into sewer, set up some kind of monitor, and maybe get a handle on where it's going and who's got it.
I think you can get a handle potentially on the level of disease in a certain community, and then target resources, assuming that we could arrange some organized way to use medical resources in this country, which I am not holding my breath on, but that's a separate conversation. But you could theoretically target ventilators to a certain area, testing to a certain area. You can start quarantine and stop quarantine based on that data and not based on how many people have died, how many people are in the ICU. And so when this inevitably comes back in the fall, if we can do this sort of thing, you can start testing and then say what the idea would be when you started seeing these numbers go up, you say, okay, everyone stay home for 2 or 3 weeks. And as opposed to doing 12 weeks of this, which is really effectively what it's going to be close to in Kentucky, you might get 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of it and do that 2 or 3 times. But that is going to be less detrimental to the economy than 12-week stoppages.
Well, and that's the coolest thing I've heard about this, and which is why I love innovation. You know, the whole point of these conversations, Catalyst Talks, was named after the book that Brett Boyd and I wrote that, you know, David, I don't think you've bought a copy of yet. But
I did buy a copy.
Have you read it?
I have read some of it. Michael has read it all, however.
I think we have.
The point is,
Maybe over here.
I don't have a signed copy.
okay, you can get it right here. Shameless promotion. But
I'll grab it. Thank you.
Let's see if I can find it.
Everything that we talk about, Brett Boyd and I, in that book, is that if you're going to make a decision about what direction you're going to go, you first have to start with your assumptions, all the tools that you have, understanding what change is about. And what I'm hearing today that I never thought would be a part of the conversation of COVID is the importance of poop and sewer. Oh my gosh. Look, I'm looking over at myself 10 seconds later, and I just saw the copy of the book. And David, I thought it was you holding it up, only to be disappointed it was me. But anyway, the point is, I never thought that poop would be the answer, but here's what we're hearing today.
There you go. I would think as 2 5-timers, that would be our gift.
Where's
is a
our
signed copy,
5-timers
jacket,
I want
and
the smoking
or just a
jacket.
copy of Catalyst.
You'll get a copy of Catalyst, but
Signed by Amy.
I want a paw print from Flossie.
yes, you'll get a paw print from Flossie as well. I will say this, though. What is so unique about innovation, how it happens, we could talk, and I'd like you to give me a couple examples from medical history about our biggest discoveries came in ways that people didn't even imagine.
Correct.
You know, my favorite example is GPS, which people don't think about enough. They hold their phone. They're trying to use Waze to go to and from on Google Maps. But it was Sputnik. It was the threat that the Soviets posed in the 1950s that they first put a satellite up, that the satellite had its own beacon system that allowed the Soviet scientists to know where it was, but allowed American scientists who, by the way, they were just doing it kind of like for fun, figuring out like, you know, I can hear that thing and I can also hear it in California. And if I triangulate from New York to California, what time we heard it, we can kind of figure out where it was. And then they reverse engineered that technology and we got GPS. Yeah. So that's what innovation is about. This kind of a threat that is hitting all of us globally. I'm excited. So are there other examples, and I'm putting you on the spot, in medical history where we didn't really expect the answer to come from this area, but boom, there we got it.
I'll give you one where I think you're going to get an answer. Is one of our mentors is the head of pediatric immunology at Duke, and he's actually an HIV researcher. And he began his HIV research. He was actually doing pediatric kidney research. And they had this new virus that was
they didn't even know what it was.
They didn't even know what it was. And it was these kids who were immunosuppressed were getting sick with it. But of course, those kids were getting a lot of transfusions. And it came to find out it was HIV. And since then has done a ton of HIV research. And in that vein is now he was doing HIV research. And now people are living longer. But
so there's a question in HIV.
And by the way, Terry Bryant gives another regular viewer, gives a shout out. This is very informative to the both of you. So
hey, Terry,
keep going.
So one of the things about people with HIV is they get coronary artery disease quicker. And so the question has now been, do they get it quicker because of the medicines that we use? Because now it tends to be more of a chronic illness in people and not sudden death. You look at Freddie Mercury versus Magic Johnson. There was a bam, it changed all quickly like that. And so it turned out,
and because they're both popular figures in pop culture history, what was the difference between
triple therapy?
What's that?
Triple
Do you mean
therapy.
time difference, or the difference?
So there was AZT, I think, was in the late 80s, mid 80s, somewhere in that range. By the early 90s, they had developed triple therapy, which is where they were using 3 different medicines.
Well,
and
antiretrovirals, just like remdesivir.
Yeah,
Remdesivir is that same
by
class.
using those 3 medicines, they were able to knock down the viral count so low that it became more of a chronic disease. Our point in all of this is Dr. Sleesman started collecting blood samples in the 80s and still has samples from people with HIV in the 80s.
Yeah.
Still has those samples. And so they've gone back, and it turns out that HIV may affect the way cholesterol metabolism crosses your gut, which may in turn turns out the leading cause of death in the United States, which is coronary artery disease. And so somebody who started off looking in renal in kids with renal transplant, is now doing research on, coronary artery disease. And so, the fact of the matter is, oftentimes we don't know. And I think there are groups out there who raise funding for a specific, to research a specific illness, and they limit their money just to that specific illness. And the problem with that is so much medical innovation comes from, places that we didn't expect it. And so, like, all cancer research really can affect other types of cancer.
Yeah, I mean, this is my shameless shout out for the fact that you cannot have simply a private sector solution or a government solution. I'm a big fan of the 2 working, as Jon Stewart would say, smartly together, because we take so much for granted, as I gave in the example of GPS, or it could be the modern internet, could be computers. It is only through government applying the money for general research, general scientific research. In other words, just go throw atoms together and figure out what comes out of it, with no intent on commercializing the result.
One of the biggest problems is that when we start applying politics to science and we start saying, why are you doing studies on ants? Why are we spending money on ant research? Well, the answer to that is we don't know. Right?
Yeah.
But other things come from that. And, and so getting into nitpicking.
But David, in defense of those politicians who want to hold up a chart on the floor of the Congress that say we studied for $250,000 the science of ant procreation, isn't that an easy just foil that they can point to rather than the bigger problems that they might have in their own world?
That's exactly.
It shows me they weren't a
unfortunately,
science major. That's all it shows. That's all it shows me. It's just you weren't a science major. What are you doing on the Science and Technology Committee?
It's like standing on the floor of a Senate with a snowball saying there's no global warming because here's snow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Again, we're not trying to get.
I don't want to get into politics.
No. I don't even like to do our checkbook. I shouldn't be put on a banking committee.
True.
There you go.
I'm just saying that
we've jumped the shark here.
Yeah, we jumped the shark. Everybody disagrees.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. But do you know the origin of the expression "jumping the shark"?
Yes, I do. But I'll let you tell the story.
So there they were, Happy Days. I mean, it was the greatest show of the 70s going into the 80s. They had more spinoffs out of Happy Days than anybody. And then with Fonzie, they just weren't quite sure where to go. And so they decided that he would get into like Evel Knievel style stuff. So they were going to have him jump over a big giant tank of sharks. And in the TV movie industry, and I think John Perry's backing me up on this, it was jumping the shark. And then after that, everybody just said, okay, Happy Days is over.
Yeah.
Think of how many spinoffs came from that. Joni and Chachi. I mean, come on. It is literally Ron Howard, who later became one of the greatest movie director, producer people ever. So we can't knock happy days. We just have to give tribute that even they wore out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress.
Kind of like this conversation. We talked about poop.
Yeah.
Hey, we've talked. Wait, what we didn't finish about the London story of cholera.
Yeah.
Was when he was analyzing sewer and water and tracking patterns, he figured out, and I forget his name, and if anybody's watching that remembers, please correct me. John Perry says Henry Winkler was a water skier too. Yes, he was.
He did.
Tribute to Fonzie. But what we forget about that story is, besides his name, was that when he tried to trace the pattern of where the sickness was and wasn't, it was anybody living or working in the beer brewery in that neighborhood, because they prepared, boiled, and treated all the water, or as a part of the fermentation process. Anything you want to add to that from a scientific or medical point as that take a beer?
In your water. I mean, that's what happens.
Mm-hmm. There it is. I'm doing my part to stay healthy by drinking beer. Is that
It all comes back to beer.
okay? So we're going to wrap up here. 5:11 local time there where you all are in Kentucky. I'm glad to know that the governor gave himself a day off. He has been doing quite well from all I can tell. Anything on the data? We were picking on Tennessee quite a bit in the early days. Anything between Kentucky and Tennessee, and what we want to say about the difference between their response and their rates?
I think the data is really going to be interesting over the next few weeks on, where the counts go up and down as you open up society. I will say, if you give somebody with a common cold antibiotics and they get better, that doesn't mean the antibiotics made it better. And so one of the things
that pointed that out before, causation versus correlation. Right. Is that right, Beth?
And yeah. And so one of the issues that you're getting into is now we are beginning to get into the time of year where respiratory viruses typically go away on their own. I'm not going to say that's going to happen with COVID, but I am going to say I don't know why it would necessarily behave differently than other respiratory viruses. So there may be a natural lull coming up, and as we open up states, we may see these numbers not rebound dramatically, which would be a good thing. But that doesn't mean it's not going to come back in the fall, number one. Number two, if they do start bumping up through May and into early June, it's going to be a long time.
A new normal. Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. I want to thank you on this Saturday afternoon for spending your time, David and Beth, and the folks that tuned in live. I'm going to allow this to just live over on Facebook and on YouTube as what we call evergreen. And then I'll add more links over time and figure out how to continue this conversation. The coolest part about all this is, and you two know this, but others may not know, is I'm not editing these videos. These are just going on live and they'll just live there. Sometimes I take the transcript and add to it, meaning that I actually add closed caption for folks that can follow along when they're just moving along on their Facebook. But you two are doing a tremendous service for the community, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking the time. Anything else to add that I didn't talk about?
Where's my book?
All right, I'll give you a damn copy of the book. You could just buy it so that I can buy another beer.
But then I got to buy it, and then I got to ship it, and then you got to ship it back. And I've already bought one copy.
We just don't know where it is.
All right, fair enough.
I think I bought a digital copy, and it's on my phone. Here's my copy.
Oh, yeah, it is on the phone. It is on the phone somewhere.
Catalyst Talks with Catalyst. By the way, I just want to point out, could these hands be model hands?
No.
There's no biting in the nails. There's no issues there. I'm just saying, for people that are into modeling, my hands are available. You know what I mean?
But once again, it seems like we've jumped the shark.
Okay. All right. Y'all have a good Saturday afternoon.
Thank you.
All right.
Be safe, everyone.
Terry Bryant and John Perry for both your comments. Y'all take care.
We'll see you later. Bye.